Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Margaret Brennan here in the CBS newsroom with Juan Zarate, my colleague here at CBS, National Security Analyst.
Great to see you, Margaret.
Juan, it has been some time since the fatal attack in Benghazi that killed 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador there. But the autopsy as to what happened that night has been re-examined and re-examined time and again. Once again, in the headlines, Secretary of State John Kerry's been subpoenaed now to go appear before Capitol Hill to answer questions about more documents that reveal how the administration handled communication after the attack. What more is there to learn at this point? What questions still aren't answered?
Well, I think with the Select Committee, they're really going to start honing down on what was happening inside the White House that night, because that's the one sort of area of the narrative and of the autopsy, as you put it, that really hasn't been as closely examined. People have tried to get at it, but the question of, for example, where was the president? What was the president being told? What was he deciding? What did he order that night? Those are questions that have not fully been answered. And the autopsy to date has largely been around what happened at the State Department, what happened at DOD, what happened with the military, what happened outside the confines of the West Wing. And I think what you're going to see from the Select Committee is an attempt to get inside to the West Wing, especially with the revelation of the emails trying to coordinate the communication post facto coming out of the White House. And so I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the questions, and frankly, that then dovetails with the question of how was the administration not only trying to portray this, but how do they actually perceive the threat, which is a really important and striking question moving forward as we look at the role of Al-Qaeda and regional groups and the threat that they pose.
Now, this issue is one that's become highly politicized, to put it mildly, and where I cover day in, day out for the State Department. It's highly emotional because they want to continue to do expeditionary diplomacy, go beyond the wire in dangerous places, and they want to be able to continue to do that without having to answer questions that have nothing to do with policy. Do you think that any of those bigger picture questions about improvements to security, about making our diplomats abroad able to do their jobs any better, are going to be addressed?
Well, I don't think that's why the Select Committee's been named, but I certainly hope that we get to some of these core issues moving forward.
Because you haven't seen embassy security bills really move through Congress.
No,
you haven't seen a lot of that funding so that something like this doesn't happen again.
I think you're right, and I think there's a fundamental question, and there's a question raised by Cofer Black when he was ambassador for counterterrorism, former counterterrorism chief for the CIA, talking about the need to think differently about what our expeditionary diplomacy looks like. This isn't diplomacy of the 19th century of Vienna and London and Paris. We've got to think differently about the diplomats we put out in places like Benghazi or near Rawalpindi or in difficult places like Afghanistan. And I think part of the debate has not moved forward to figure out what does that look like? What does our posture look like? And what are the risks we're willing to take with our diplomats in very difficult situations? And so I think you're absolutely right. That's a part of this debate that has to move forward. You haven't seen it really. And it's something the State Department has to help answer and the Hill has to help answer. I also think the broader question of what's our policy on Libya? After all of this, right? Ambassador Stevens was out there trying to build ties with people, trying to forge a policy. And the reality is, it feels like we've been absent in terms of the post-Gaddafi period in Libya, and the question of where it's headed now with the pro-Western Prime Minister Ali Zaidan removed from power, and what appears to be a more extremist bent to the government coming forward and extremists flowing in and out of Libya. Those are key questions moving forward. What are we going to do about that with our European partners or others? That has to be part of the debate. And frankly, the final thing I would say is we have to have an honest debate about where is the threat moving forward. The old sort of framing of Al-Qaeda core and the way we thought about Al-Qaeda in 2001 just doesn't work in 2014. And it doesn't work in the context of the kinds of things we saw in Benghazi. And so that has to get wrapped into this as well. How are we perceiving the threat? Not just that night, which is important, but also moving forward, because it's going to be a threat not just in 2014, but in the years to come. And that's important for this administration and the administration to come.
The State Department report on terrorism for 2013 said attacks were up 40%. So it's talking about that new kind of attack, new kind of affiliate. Deserves some attention there, because it will be a flashpoint.
You're seeing it there in Libya, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia. the threat is there, it's metastasized. How do we deal with it?
We could talk all day about that in North Africa and the continent. Thank you so much, Juan.
Thanks, Margaret.
This has been Flashpoints.